I'm delighted that you've decided to read my book Unfinished and take the time to go through this 6-week video curriculum based on the book. My hope for you is that God will use this study and the book to help you find that amazing adventure that God has in store for your life as you seek to follow Jesus Christ and be obedient to Him. You know, I thought I might start out by just explaining why I named the book Unfinished. The word really has two meanings to me. The title has two meanings. First of all, it refers to the unfinished work of God's kingdom. You know, 2,000 years ago when Jesus walked the earth, He gave an important assignment to His disciples just before He left. He told us to go into all the world and to make disciples in all nations, teaching people to obey everything He had taught. He also talked a lot about building the kingdom of God and establishing the kingdom of God on earth. And here we are 2,000 years later, and the work of that kingdom, the work of that Great Commission, still remains unfinished. We haven't finished the job. But you know, the word has a second meaning as well. As I talk and speak around the country and meet hundreds and even thousands of people who have read my first book, The Hole in Our Gospel, many of them come up to me with something like this. They say, Rich, you know, I loved your book and I love your message, but I'm really struggling to find that special thing that God has called me to do. I feel that there's something missing in my Christian faith that I haven't found. And I feel incomplete in some way. And so this book is also about the notion that you and I are incomplete as well. We're unfinished unless we found that thing that God has called us to do, serving His kingdom, building His kingdom, and carrying out the assignment that Jesus gave us to do. We're unfinished. We're incomplete. And this study is about finishing the job, but also becoming more complete as followers of Jesus Christ as we walk with Him and grow in our faith. I don't know about you, but I love mysteries. I watch mystery shows on television. I read mystery novels. I think everybody likes a good mystery. When I was the president of Parker Brothers Games many years ago, one of our best-selling games was Clue. Now, I'm sure just about everybody watching this video study has probably played Clue at one time or another. And you remember the premise of the game. Something happens. A murder is committed in a mansion. And all the players have to figure out the mystery. Who committed the murder? What was the murder weapon used? And in what room of the mansion was the murder committed? And it might be Colonel Mustard used the lead pipe in the ballroom to commit the murder. It might be Miss Scarlet used the wrench in the study or the conservatory. And the whole game centers around figuring out that mystery. You know, the greatest mystery of all is the mystery of our lives. And we think about it, the basic questions of life, you know, why are we here? Who created us? How did we get here? And is there any meaning in our lives that we can find? Is there any meaning and purpose that we can discover for our lives? That is perhaps life's greatest mystery. And it's a mystery that every one of us, one way or another, has to figure out and try to provide answers for those questions. I think there are good answers to those questions, and I hope to share some of those with you throughout this study. You know, I came of age in Syracuse, New York in the 1950s and 60s. And as I grew up, I learned more about my community. I went to school. I began to learn more about our country and more about the world that we live in. I studied history in high school and began to discover that there was a much bigger world and a much bigger story than just my story and my world. I discovered that long before I was born, this story that I had woken up in the middle of had begun. And there were all kinds of things that had happened in history for thousands of years, going back to the ancient Egyptians and through the time of Christ and the Middle Ages and the Renaissance and up to the issues of American history with George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. I realized I had been born in the middle of all of this, a story that began before I was born and will continue long after I'm gone. That is the mystery of life that we're trying to solve. That is what we're trying to figure out. And it doesn't matter who you are, whether you were Albert Einstein or Lady Gaga or anybody you can think of today, we all have to answer those same questions. How did we get here? What does it all mean? And is there a purpose for our lives? And as I grew up and tried to figure out my version of the truth and my answers to those questions, I realized that everyone had their own version of the truth. You know, 2,000 years ago when Jesus appeared before Pontius Pilate, just as he was going to his trial and his crucifixion, He said to Pontius Pilate, "I came to testify to the truth." And Pilate asked that now famous question. He looked at Jesus and he says, "What is truth? What is truth?" You know, that question is as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago. Just what is truth? You know, I believe that truth matters. Truth provides the foundation upon which we build our lives. And every choice we make in our life, where we work, what we do, who we marry, who our friends are, every one of those choices we make is based on some foundation. It's based on our understanding of what is true and what is not. You know, Jesus understood how important it was for us to have a solid foundation. I'd like to read a passage for you from Matthew chapter 7, and I want you to listen to what Jesus said about the importance of foundational truth. "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash." I want you to notice something critical about this passage. It is not the person who hears Jesus' words whose house is built on the rock. It is not the person who just believes Jesus' words whose house is built on the foundation of rock. It is the person that hears his words and puts them into practice in their lives. Those are the people that Jesus says have a house built on a solid foundation that will not fall. You know, in the 21st century, we live in a world where the winds blow and the rain beats down. And it's so easy for us to get blown off course. It's so easy for our lives to drift in the wrong direction, for us to make bad decisions, especially if we haven't built our house on the right foundation. Pontius Pilate understood that truth matters. Truth matters a great deal because everything we do in our lives is based on our understanding of what is true and what is not true, what is right and what is wrong. And I want to argue with you that unless we build our foundation on the teachings of Christ, unless we live our lives according to his teachings, we will get blown off course and our house will fall with a great crash because truth matters and truth has consequences. You know, in chapter 1 of my book, I ask you as readers to take a little imaginary adventure with me. And I ask you to imagine that tomorrow morning when you wake up, you don't wake up in your home, you don't wake up in wherever you live on Earth, but you wake up on another planet. And you wake up in a very foreign environment. And as you look outside the window of the structure that you're in, you see alien beings that don't resemble humans. You can see that there's a civilization out there. You can see that you're obviously in a different place in the universe, but you have no idea how you got there. And then I try to make the argument that that's exactly what happened to me, and that's exactly what happened to you. Sometime in the last 100 years, each one of us woke up on planet Earth, the third planet from the sun in the Milky Way galaxy, in a universe that is unimaginably vast. And we woke up in the middle of a story that began long before we were born and will continue long after we die. And each one of us spends a good part of our life, and maybe all of our lives, trying to make sense out of that mystery. How did we get here? What does it all mean? Is there any purpose and meaning to our lives? Who created us? Where did all of this come from? All of this beauty and complexity we see around us. Well, essentially, if you try to solve that mystery, life's greatest mystery, you have only 3 choices you can make. And it doesn't really matter who you are. Albert Einstein had to make these choices and decisions. Lady Gaga has to make these choices and decisions. Abraham Lincoln had to make these choices and decisions about reality and truth and meaning. So let me take you through those 3 choices. The first choice is this: we can believe that there is no story. In other words, we didn't wake up in the middle of any story. Everything we see around us is meaningless and random. There's no purpose to our lives. We're just an accident of carbon chemistry. And think about that. That means that a human being is no more significant than a rock or a bottle or an ant. It's just all chemistry. It's just all inanimate objects that are meaningless and have no purpose in a random universe. Now, what are the consequences of that? Well, the first consequence is there's no such thing as truth. There's no such thing as truth in a meaningless universe. There's no such thing as morality or right or wrong. We can make up whatever rules we want, and they're meaningless. They don't really have any authority behind them. So there is no right or wrong. There is no morality. And that means that we live in a world where anything goes. Anything we choose to do, any behavior that we have is justifiable because we live in a meaningless universe. Now, I don't know about you, but that philosophy of life doesn't make me want to jump out of bed every morning and greet the day. What a terrible way to live our lives, to believe that we have no meaning, we have no purpose in our lives. But this is essentially the choice that a pure atheist is making. A pure atheist believes there is no creator. If there is no creator, there is no author to a big story, there is no meaning, and our lives are just empty. We're born and we die and we wither like the grass, and that's the end of it. Human beings are not significant. And of course, we can justify all kinds of things. I can kill a person or injure a person. I can rob a bank. It's all meaningless. There's no morality. There's no right or wrong. What a terrible way to live our lives. Well, there's a second choice we can make to explain all we see around us, and a second choice that can guide the way we live our lives, and that's the choice to make up our own stories. Most people, even atheists, can't function without some meaning in their lives, and so people tend to create structure in their lives just to provide boundaries and meaning for them to live by, and they create their own code of ethics. They often begin sentences with phrases like, well, I think that, or I believe that, and then they fill in the blank with their own home brew. They might say things like, I believe that all religions lead to the same God, or I believe that God helps those who help themselves. They might say, it's a dog-eat-dog world, and only the strong survive. They might have a philosophy that says, the one who dies with the most toys wins. These are all kind of truisms that people throw out there, and they have one thing in common. None of them are based on the truth. None of them are based on God's truth. They're all made up and they're all arbitrary. I often call these people the what's right for you may not be right for me people, or what's true for you may not be true for me. Now think about that. What if I said the law of gravity is true for you, but it's not true for me? Well, that would be fine for me to believe that until I went up on a 10-story building and jumped off, and the result would be the same whether it was me or you. It would be a big splat on the sidewalk. So it's kind of nonsense to believe that truth is relative, and what's true for one person may not be true for another. Now, that might be an accurate way to describe our different taste in foods or clothing. You know, you like this, I like that. That's fine. But when it comes to absolute truth, you can't make up your own truth. It simply isn't true. Now, this philosophy of life is really interesting because it can lead to very different results. One person who makes up their own truth might become a murderer, and they believe that human life is not worth much and that what they want to do is more important than the rights of others, and so they might take other lives believing that it's no big deal. So it can lead to a murderer, or it could lead to a successful CEO who lives his life or her life according to a belief that if we work hard, we can get ahead, we can earn a lot of money and buy a lot of toys and become very, very successful. So you might have a murderer or a CEO that results from the same philosophy of life, making up their own rules as they go. So let me review our first two choices. As we look at life and try to figure out life's mystery, we can choose to believe, number one, that there is no story whatsoever. Or we can choose, number two, to make up our own story and live according to that reality, or at least what we believe to be reality. But fortunately, there's a third choice. We can become part of God's story, part of what God is doing in the world, believing that there is a God, there is a creator, there is an author to this story that we woke up in the middle of. And the thing about authors is that they write stories, and in those stories, they create individual characters. One of my favorite book series is the Lord of the Rings Trilogy. And as you read that wonderful series of books, or if you've seen the movies, most of us have seen the movies, you realize that J.R.R. Tolkien created this phenomenal world. You know, in that world, Middle-earth, he was the creator. He created all the creatures and beings and the history before and the history that would go on into the future, the things that would happen after the story. And if you look at what Tolkien did, he created all kinds of individual and unique characters. Characters like Frodo and Sam, Gollum and Gandalf, Boromir, all of these characters played a role in that story. Now, the thing about authors is they always create a character for a specific purpose, to play a specific role in the story. There are no extras, there are no characters that are just put into books or stories for no reason whatsoever. They're all created to play a specific role. Now think about that in terms of God. God created you and God created me. He didn't create us by mistake. He didn't create us for no reason or no purpose. He created us very specifically, and there is no one that has ever lived that has had the exact same package of skills and abilities, gifts and talents, personality traits that you've been created with. And then God took each one of us and He placed us in time and space in the story. We were born at a certain time in a certain place. We were placed inside of a certain family. We live in a certain community. All of this was God's intention. The author created you and I for a purpose. And the challenge of our lives, the exciting adventure of our lives, if we make choice 3 to believe that God is the author of our story, is we get to figure out and lean into that thing He created us to do, that thing He created only us to do, that thing that no one else can do quite the same way that we can, because God created us each totally unique and totally different, and He created us for a purpose. I began this session by suggesting that the title Unfinished for my book suggests that there's something about you and I that is incomplete, that is unfinished. There's something in our lives that God meant for us to do. And until we find that thing, we're incomplete as people. But you know, the exciting part of that, the exciting news that is really the premise of this whole study and the premise of the book, is that I believe that God has invited you to join Him in changing the world. What a big vision, what a big dream, what a big idea. God has invited you and I to be His partner in changing the world. And He's created each one of us to play a very specific role in the story that He is writing, the story that He's been writing for thousands and thousands of years. And now today, in this time, at this place, you've stepped onto the stage of God's story. And finally, I believe that we can only discover our deepest purpose and a deepest sense of meaning in our lives when we find our place in that amazing story that God is writing, when we find the role and discover the role that He created us to play. But if we're going to discover any of this, it starts by building our lives on the foundation of God's truth. Because the winds will blow and the rains will come down and the floodwaters will rise, and our lives will stand or fall based on the foundation upon which we build our lives.